Hey everyone, David C. Anderson here coming at you from the Knife Center. Welcome to Knife AQ number 60, the knife series where I answer all your questions, whether they're sharp or dull. And this week, we're getting into some nitty-gritty aspects about steel. So, let's get into it. All right, folks. Thank you all for your question submissions for this series. If you're new to the series and you want a chance to have one of your questions featured, just leave them down in the comments section below this video and we'll come through and pick out some good ones. This week, let's get into the first question, which comes from Mitchell Baker. Hey DCA and or Seth. Seth is not here, I'm sorry. I recently got knife envy from my office mate when he whipped out his new Benchmade Claymore. Wonderful timing that Seth had just posted the new SOGTAC AU Auto that had released. Short story short, I bought it, but we were wondering what are the differences in his CPM D2 and my CRYO D2. Many thanks. All right, good question. There is actually a significant difference between D2, whether it's CRYO D2 or not, and CPM D2. I'll start with that SOGTAC right here. CRYO D2 is what they're labeling all their blades as. D2 itself is just a traditional steel, just an ingot of material that gets ground down to the shape they want. The cryo part in CRYO D2 refers to one of the steps they take in the heat treating process, where it's treated usually with something like liquid nitrogen. The steel, after being ground, is and as part of the heat treat process, is held at a very low temperature. The improvement here is moderate. You're not going to see a huge difference between CRYO D2 and standard D2. It should increase the toughness just a little bit, which is helpful since D2 is not a particularly tough steel to begin with. But the fact that they're saying CRYO D2 on the blades is mostly just marketing, really, just because certain other blades out there made of D2 don't say CRYO D2 doesn't mean it wasn't cryoed. May have been, may not have been. But D2, solid stuff. CPM D2, however, is not a traditional ingot steel. They still use D2 in the name because metallurgically the elements are the same as your standard D2, but this is made with the CPM process from Crucible. CPM stands for Crucible Particle Metallurgy. So this is actually a particle steel. And the benefit on D2 in particular compared to your standard D2 is grain size. And without getting too into the weeds, although this is an episode about steel, there's going to be a lot of weeds around here, so I'll try to keep it digestible, as digestible as I can. But essentially, standard D2 is known for having really big carbides. And for that, you are getting some good edge retention, but toughness tends to suffer when the carbides get really big. CPM D2, because it's a powdered process where everything's laid out and then sintered together, it's able to keep the grain much tighter. You have much smaller carbides. You're still going to get D2-like edge retention. In fact, your edge retention is probably not all that different between the two, but you are going to get a lot more toughness out of the CPM processed D2. So that's actually a pretty significant difference between these two and between your guys' two knives. Now, if these aren't things where you're like hammering on them, really beating on them, the toughness may never be an issue, but edge retention between you two guys ought to be pretty similar. And let me just take a minute to talk about this SOGTAC AU, since Seth got to present that on a new knives video. I really like the way they've done their auto mechanism here. It's essentially based around their version of the crossbar lock. You've got pull tabs on both sides, and it is such an intuitive system to use. I mean, a button, like on the Claymore here, super easy to use, don't get me wrong. But the motion here, you just pull back on that lock bar, and you're good to go. And the other thing I really enjoy is they've added, instead of a separate switch for a lock, you just push it forward to lock the blade. And it's not gonna come loose easily, but you don't have to do a separate motion for unlocking the blade when you want to deploy it. You just give it a little bit of a stronger pull, but it's still one motion, and it's the same motion you would have practiced over time. So in a stressful situation, you're not gonna have to think about it. Also, Nice thinner blades here, gonna slice really well. Thinner handles, gonna carry really well too. Really dig these knives. Full-size version right here with about a 3.5 inch blade coming in about $150. I think they're pretty cool. All right, next question comes from Charles Burrow. Hey DCA, thinking about getting the Double Star Pathseeker. What are your thoughts on the 80 CRV2 steel? How hard is it to sharpen in the field? And is there a similar knife that you like more? Okay, cool. 80 CRV2 is pretty good stuff. It's a simpler carbon steel, really popular with bladesmiths especially. It's a really good forging steel. But I do want to clear up one misconception about this. It's not actually a Chinese steel. I think some folks out there, I've actually encountered this myself, because of the name of it, 80 CRV2, sounds similar in ways to like 8CR MOV13, stuff like that. But as I mentioned, this is not a cheap Chinese steel. This actually, 80 CRV2 is actually I think a German classification, if I'm remembering correctly. Certain companies here in the States make this steel, but they call it by different names. I think Crucible calls it like Halva or Halvan or something like that. Latrobe has a name for it. These are those weeds I'm talking about. Let's get out of it. Let's get out of the weeds. Anyway, back to the knife and back to the steel. I like it. It's a solid, tough field grade steel. Love it. As for sharpening in the field, it's not super hard to sharpen because of its nature, but in a way that's a good thing. It's just plenty tough. It's going to be easy enough to maintain, so you're always going to be able to have a sharp edge. And with a design like this Pathseeker, you've got an incredibly tough knife, not just because of the steel, because your blade thickness there also grants a lot of strength to the knife. Really cool design. It actually reminds me in ways of some of like the old 1980s survival knives, like the Dartmoor survival knife, stuff like that. And as such, there's not really a lot out there today quite like this knife. So if you dig it, buy it. I think it's a really cool knife. No hesitations about the steel whatsoever. It's going to be a solid survival knife for you. All right, next question comes from William Farr, as opposed to William Neer.
Or somewhere in between.
Somewhere in between. Sorry for the dad jokes, everybody.
He's not going to stop.
William Farr asks, although my personal preference is USA-made knives, certain Chinese knives like the Kansept Delta have caught my eye. My question on this knife, and it can apply to other China-made knives as well, is the CPM S35 VN stainless steel blade shipped over for assembly of the knife, or is the steel forged in China? Here you go. Here's that particular knife coming in about $217 right now. You got a 3.5 inch S35 VN blade. And if it's labeled CPM S35 VN anywhere in the world, it was made by Crucible here in the States and then shipped over to wherever the assembly is being made, or the construction. Crucible's not grinding these blades for Kansept. That's being done in China in this particular case. Certain steels like that, if you see something that says CPM, that's a Crucible product made here in the States. If you see something that says CTS, that's a Carpenter product, also made here in the United States. Certain things like M390, always made by Bowler in Europe, as they don't say. Other steels like D2, that's kind of a recognized standard anywhere. That could be made anywhere. If it says VG10, that's made in Japan. So certain things like that are only made certain places. When you get into the lower standards, the less proprietary stuff, those can be made anywhere. So if you've got a Chinese-made knife, but it says S35 VN on it, at least that particular material did originate here in the USA.
Kind of the difference between a steel spec and a steel product.
Exactly, yeah. S35 VN would be a product versus D2 would be a spec, or 1095 would be a specification. Something like that. Good clarification there, Thomas. Thank you.
I have them sometimes.
Bongo Fury. That might be my favorite name of the day.
He's going to be doing this all day now.
Bongo, that's a cool name.
All right.
Like, can you imagine the hands moving really fast on the drum? Anyway, Bongo Fury
Dance Dance Revolution with drums.
Says, it is my understanding that M390 is made in Austria by Bowler, as we just mentioned, and 20CV is made in the USA by Crucible, but they are essentially the same product. Yes, that's actually true. And CTS 204P, made by Carpenter, also the same spec, but product has a different name, even though they are made with the same sort of specifications. Not quite perfectly identical. Metallurgically, they'd be the same, but each company has their own like forging process or powder process for their steel, so there could be slight differences in how they're made. Weeds, people, weeds. So back to the question, why then are American companies using M390 instead of 20CV? Is it cheaper to buy or is it something else? Also, how are these companies claiming that their knives are made in the USA when the blade steel is foreign made? As to why the company might use M390 versus 20CV, it could be a supply issue on people's supply chains. They have to look like how much are they going to be able to get from Crucible, but they have this product over here. They can't get enough. Maybe we'll go to Bowler and get some of their material here. So supply chains do have a lot to do with it, and especially nowadays, supply chains are all kinds of out of whack. I think companies are going to be looking all over to find what they can for their products. I will say though, we've seen a significant number of USA companies who have been using M390 steel are switching over to more 20CV, and that could be because Crucible's making more of it to respond to the demand. Could be also response to supply chains or taxation these days. But perfect example right here is Benchmade. This top knife is discontinued, unfortunately, but this is my Valet, uses M390 steel, and here is a Griptilian, mini Griptilian, using 20CV. Both essentially are going to give you the same performance, or at least so much the same you're never going to notice an actual difference in actual use. But 20CV has been stronger in the lineup of late. Like I said, this Valet is discontinued. I think the only M390 blade in Benchmade's current lineup is one of the bug out models. Everything else using kind of that tier of steel has made the switch to 20CV, which I kind of like. I like, M390 is great. I love our friends over there in Europe, but I'm an American boy. I kind of like to have it all American, so to speak.
He's gonna have his apple pie and eat it too.
Apple pie is great with some ice cream, I will say. Pie is better than cake.
Circles.
Fight me. But back to the issue of, an M390 blade on an American-made knife. Can you actually call it American-made? In my opinion, I think so. I don't have a problem with that. Educate yourself as a consumer. You'll be able to know that, the M390 material, the raw, flat stock of material may have come from somewhere else. But Benchmade is still grinding this knife, shaping the knife, and putting everything together, all the other parts here in America. In my mind, I think that still qualifies as an American-made knife, but there's no hard and fast definition on is it or isn't it. So that is obviously going to have to be left up to you, the consumer. And let me know your thoughts on that down in the comments too. Does every single component have to be made in America for it to be American-made, or if it's all being built here? And when I say built, I mean actually not just assembled here, but actually being created here. Does that work for you? I'm genuinely curious. Would like to know what you guys thought. Now, if for instance, Bowler, who makes M390, if Bowler were grinding, shaping, and heat treating this steel in Europe and then sending it over, that gets into, in my mind, to be more of a assembled in the US thing rather than a made in the US thing. So hope that helps. Let me know in the comments. Like I said, genuinely curious to see what you folks think about that.
It's kind of a sliding scale.
It's hard to put where's the point where it is or isn't. It's kind of hard to nail down because there's no, consistent definition.
There's no fine line, more like a Venn diagram.
Yeah, anyway.
Circles again.
Circles. All right, now we're going to get to the lightning round today, and we'll try to avoid the weeds and keep the questions rolling too. Kid666 asks, "Hey DCA, if you could give one budget knife a super steel upgrade, which knife would you choose?" Easy answer for me on this. Comes from Gerber. It is the Sumo. Comes in about $39, and honestly, I would settle for not even necessarily a super steel upgrade, but just a steel upgrade, because we've got 7CR stainless here, which there's plenty other stuff that's not a super steel that excites me a lot more than that particular steel. But the design is really nice. The blade shape is very utilitarian. nice high flat or full flat ground drop point blade. Thick enough, it could be tough. A lot of slicing performance. I would love to see this knife in something like 3V or crew wear or something like that. Really kind of lean into the tough vibes that you could get from this knife. But I'd be happy with D2 even on this particular knife. You guys know I love a crossbar lock, and the design on here is really nice. I think it really deserves to have some really cool materials thrown at it for the blade. All right, next question comes from B Bro. I realize that there is a difference and have read as much, but as far as for me and the end user, is there any noticeable difference between CPM 154 and 154 CM? So similar to CPM D2 and standard D2, CPM 154 is a powdered version of 154 CM, which is an ingot steel. And similarly to the CPM D2 story, you're going to get more toughness out of the CPM version of this steel. Edge retention, all things being equal, should be pretty much the same. You're not going to really see a huge difference there. So if it's a thin slicey knife like this Leek, you might not see that toughness come into play, except for one thing. You could potentially, since you have a greater deal of toughness, you could potentially sharpen at a more acute angle at the actual edge, and it could stand up a little better than your standard 154 CM, which means it could hold that thinner edge longer, so it's going to feel sharper and actually feel like it lasts longer too. So that's going to be the only real difference between the two on the edge retention front. If you're talking like a bigger fixed blade that has potentially a thicker blade, might be more heavy duty, that toughness is definitely going to be more noticeable on a situation like that though, for sure. All right, Name Brand Flakes asks, DCA my friend, I've seen some discussion and heard many different answers. I'm wondering what in your opinion is a good or even the best stainless steel for bushcraft knives and machetes. Here's where the toughness comes into play again. When you're dealing with a bushcraft knife, you've typically got a much more acute angle right here at the edge, something like 12 degrees-ish on a Scandi grind. You're gonna want more toughness. So stuff like AEBL or the 12C27 that Mora uses on this cans bowl, great choices if you're looking for a tough stainless. And then when you get into bigger stuff like machetes or choppers, again, AEBL is gonna be great because it's pretty much as tough as something like 52-100 on the carbon side of things. And I've always said, like, the bigger the knife gets, the more important toughness becomes as well. So stick with tough stuff like that. And the cool thing about, a choice like 12C27 is I truly believe it is one of the better or even best options out there for a stainless bushcraft knife. It's easy to maintain in the field. It's tough. And because the raw material here is not super expensive, you can get it on everything from this $30 some Mora all the way up to $100 plus or $200 plus, like this Hella Utver right here, which the raw material on that blade might not be the most expensive part, but what a company does with it usually makes the difference on fit and finish, everything else like that. There's a reason they're still using this knife on this steel on a more expensive knife, because it truly is one of the best options for the intended use. All right, Jeremy 2 now asks, what knife steel would you not baton with because it would break? D2, actually. But again, there's caveats here, because if you're dealing with a thinner blade steel, the less tough steels out there, like D2, can be more susceptible to breakage. But steel is actually only just one of the part of the whole toughness equation. If you go with a super thick blade, like on this this double star we just looked at earlier, it can get around that a little bit. So yes, there are knife steel, or there are D2 blades out there I would feel okay batoning with, because they're thicker and could stand up a little bit more. But generally, when you're talking batoning, the tougher the better. Stay away from brittle stainless steels. I definitely wouldn't want to baton like S110V or anything like that. That would just shuddering just thinking about it. Anyway, that brings us to our most serious question for the day, which comes from Boris. Most serious question of the day. As I was twirling my number 2 pencil, I was thinking whatever happened to D1 steel. You want to take a stab at that?
No.
Me either. Maybe it just didn't have enough D for you. Well, that's all the time we've got today. make sure to leave your questions down below. As I talked about right at the top of this video, I've always got, I always have a good time combing through and pulling out questions to answer for this series. If you want to get your hands on any of these knives, make sure to leave, what?
Well, I'll leave a link in the description.
Thomas will leave links in, I'm sorry guys, Thomas will leave links in the description if you would like to purchase any knives like these, except for that Benchmade Valet, which is discontinued, like I said, unfortunately. But while you're over there, make sure you sign up for our Knife Rewards program too, because you might as well earn some free money to spend on your next knife when you buy one of these knives today. I'm David C. Anderson from the Knife Center. That's Thomas over there. We're signing off. See you next time.
Hopefully you get your marbles together next week.